museum. We really appreciate it so much, and more than we can say. Tonight we are joined by artist Lauren Ruiz. Lauren is the artist behind the installation that we are here to see tonight, Sheol. Lauren began this process of developing this installation first at an artist residency at the Santa Fe Art Institute, and then during her tenure as artist in residence here at the Museum of the Southwest. The first artist in residence that we've had really in several decades. So tonight we're going to discuss this installation a little bit. And I have some questions for Lauren, and then when I'm all done asking my questions, we're going to open it up to y'all to ask any questions that you might have for the artist. Lauren is a multimedia research-based artist based in New York. She is currently pursuing her visual practice PhD at the State University of New York, and we are honored to have her here with us. So, Lauren, to start things off, Sheol is, in a very broad sense, as an installation, you are imagining this subterranean world. This has been an element, I know, in your practice for quite some time, dealing with the underground, the subterranean. Past projects like Zone of Loss dealt with this. You've done research projects with earthworms. Tell us a little bit about your background with this subject matter and where that stems from.
Sure. So I think it kind of starts, it started as a young child. I have to say that I was around sickness and disease quite a bit as a kid, and the fascination with the body and what was happening underneath the surface of these bodies. Kind of the trauma, the mutation, the contamination of these bodies was really interesting to me, and I think as a way to process that, I just really was fascinated by that and really interested in how we relate to our bodies and how we relate to what's happening in places we can't see them. And of course, with sometimes sickness and illness, death follows, right? So there's a connection there between the idea of death and burial. So that kind of naturally made me think about burial, containment, this idea of religious institutional spaces and how we relate to the body, or how we relate to death and burial, both under internal, the interiority of the body and the interiority of the earth. So I think from that, I just kind of stayed there. I stayed there in that line of questioning of what does it mean to have this type of transformation within the body, not always from positive experience, or and then also transformation underground, and how those two relate.
So I think I'm seeing both of those internal and external factors come into play here as well. So going from kind of your broader interest in the underneath, when you first came out here to the Santa Fe Art Institute, you started experiencing what was for you a foreign landscape, a different relationship with nature. Tell us a little bit about what struck you initially and how this installation differs from previous works that dealt with the internal or the subterranean.
Absolutely. So I'm from New York. We have a very different relationship with the underground, rail systems, subways, things of that nature. But also in New York, I live on Long Island, which is an island, right? If you dig 10 feet, you hit water. It's very different than the relationship that the community of the Southwest has to land. So that's something that internally or intellectually you can think about, but then when you're embodied in that space, it's so different to really stand in a place and think, oh my gosh, there's 10,000 feet below me of material that people take out and use. It becomes part of this system or this economy. So that was really interesting. I had never been to the Southwest before. So again, this idea of the West, or this like westward expansion, or the mythos of the American landscape was very intriguing to me. And so I can understand how all these artists have come out here and just been kind of consumed by these vistas and created work to kind of think about or to explore the light and the landscape and the geology and geography of the place. So it was a lot to really take in at first, which was it was wonderful, absolutely. But it's hard to kind of rectify like where I started really thinking, oh, this space, this underground space. When I was at Santa Fe Art Institute, I was really trying to wrestle with what am I going to do? What am I going to make? What am I going to comment on? And luckily enough, someone who is here, come on, Zara, hello. She used to work at the Santa Fe Art Institute, and we had a critique. And it was like an hour and a half long. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. Southwest American, mythos of this Christianity, cowboy, this and that. And she had suggested to go to me to go to Carlsbad Caverns. Why not, right? Subterranean space, Southwest, like perfect. So from there, I'm sure you can kind of see the visual kind of comparison. I was really struck by this quiet power that existed in that type of subterranean space. And then coming to Midland and really thinking about the relationship here to subterranean space and how that relates to past works about interiority and transformation and trauma and my body as a woman, right? Like how we think about producing bodies, women as traditionally producing bodies, earth as traditionally producing body. How do we relate to those spaces? And what ideologies influence how we relate to those spaces. What's your next question? Sorry.
I was. So, at the Santa Fe Art Institute, you initially are attracted to this idea of the subterranean in the context of the Carlsbad Caverns. Mm-hmm. And now, that is pretty different to our relationship here in Midland to the subterranean, because it is, of course, the lifeblood of a lot of our industry, how our families make a living, so on and so forth, the oil industry. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, I think that kind of bringing the underground up must play a role, but there is another aspect that you really latched onto when you got to Midland and when you started doing your residency here, and that is the Midland Discovery. Can you tell us a little bit about what the Midland Discovery is and how that plays into this work?
Yeah, so does anyone know what the Midland Discovery is? The Midland Discovery. So when I came to Midland, I was surprised at how few Midlanders, is it Midlanders?
Yes.
Know what the Midland Discovery.
Definitely not Midlandites.
Not Midlanders.
Oh, anyway, sorry. How few of y'all know what the Midland Discovery was? I thought I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Everyone must know this. Everyone must celebrate this. But the Midland Discovery was essentially a discovery of human remains in 1953. The remains were originally thought to be a man, so he was deemed the Midland Man. From the Pleistocene epoch, so it was like 9,000 BC.
The oldest at the time, the oldest human
at the time.
in North America.
So 11 plus thousand years ago, right? That's how old these remains were. What's funny was when they did further investigation into these remains, they find, oh, actually, the Midland Man is a woman. And then the conversation changed. She became Midland Minnie. And I was like, what is going on here? So the Midland Man gets like agency. He's like the founding father of this place. He's the Midland Man. But because she's a woman, she's Midland Minnie. I was like, what is that? What is it about naming something? Right? why do we name something? Is it to claim something? Is it to show ownership of something? Is it this type of like power dynamic of I'm naming you, I get that right to detail how someone else would refer to you. She was also deemed the mother of Midland, which again, I think it's really funny. We think about the agency of women. Why do we just allot mother to Midland Minnie? I think that was like this little seed that was planted where she was also discovered in Monaghan Sandhills State Park, if anyone's familiar. She was discovered there, underground, right? So she was kind of exhumed. Like the discovery was a disturbance. Like what does it mean to discover something that is buried? Are you finding it or are you, disturbing a burial site? Who knows, right?
So then, sorry. So taking into account some of these different inspirations, Carlsbad, the Midland Discovery, you have a lot of different elements going on in the installation itself. We have sculptural elements, you have glass, there's a prominent sound design element as well, and you're using a range of materials from foam to latex, sand. How did you decide and go about the process of using these different materials to explore your subject matter, and ultimately, you never want to be too didactic or push people's interpretation in any specific direction too much, right? You want to leave things open to interpretation. But let us know a little bit about how you came to this installation to treat these subjects and kind of a broad idea of what we're looking at here.
So I usually work either in sculpture or in multimedia installation, which essentially means transforming a space. So for this installation, I wanted it to ride a line where it didn't necessarily feel like a sacred or religious space that was familiar, but that the feeling might be familiar in to some extent. Materials, yes, there's expandable insulation foam, there's silicone, there are nylon stockings, wire mesh, glass, and lots of sand. The materials, although a lot of them are synthetic materials, a lot of them are derived from oil-based materials, so that connection is really interesting and fun for me. But essentially it was about the form and the organic shape that they took. Like that, I chose the materials mostly because these were the materials I could use to get these more kind of mutated, organic, powerful, large, but also light structures. I have elements of the work that kind of hints at very specific religious institutions. I come from a Catholic family, so I have essentially oil prisms, holy anointing oil prisms that I had fabricated. I'm not a glass artist, but I had them fabricated and they're gorgeous. That are actually abstracted drill bits turned into holy oil vessels. So I'm thinking about holy oil, the idea of what is sacred, what is law, what is God, and taking something that does kind of the aggression and the excavation and turning that piece into something that is fragile, that then carries the thing. So turning the positive of that form into a negative that can hold something.
And so if you're incorporating this anointing oil, that then for the viewer would, for me at least, would suggest certain things. So what is being anointed? What is the anointing there for?
I mean, what is the anointing? It's a great question.
I mean, I think your central figure here. Is there, at least, and this could just be my reading, but I see this
Yeah, you
central
tell me
raised
what your-
figure, and I'd like to hear from the crowd too, but for me, this is very much a personification maybe of the Midland Woman in the center, and sort of an elevating of her, or re-elevating, kind of giving her that honor and respect maybe was not there initially, and almost reads as like an altar. But I think that is, that's the strength of an installation like this, is that there's enough there to open it up to interpretations like that. Now, I don't know if that was your intent, but that's certainly kind of my reading of it. And that being said, we would like to hear from you all. So does anybody have any questions, or does anybody want to offer their own comments or interpretations? Are there any initial questions from the crowd? Yes, sir.
When I saw Sheol, I thought of that, something that's basically, to put it crudely, a kind of Jewish version of hell in some way. Could you elaborate on that sort of title in relation to this?
Absolutely. So Sheol is the Hebrew word for abode of the dead. So it's pre-hell. So Sheol was kind of a catch-all for bodies and souls when they died. Of course, after the resurrection of Jesus Christ, then essentially you have the separation of the saved and the damned, this hierarchy that happens where then you have hell, heaven up top, right? Heaven, and you have hell, right? But Sheol was this place of, I guess, post-mortem equalizer space, where it doesn't matter your moral, like the way you held yourself morally in this life, whatever happened, you went to Sheol. So I think that's an interesting play where it's not, this kind of leveling, this moral leveling was interesting to me. And in a lot of translations of the Old Testament, Sheol, the word Sheol, which referred to a specific place, it was a name of a place, was translated out. And now it's either grave or burial, which is not what Sheol was, right? It only refers to the body when it's translated out. It doesn't refer to the soul or essence or spirit. So I think that kind of reframing through Christian translation was interesting to me, to create this space of dichotomy of the post-mortem being.
Are there any other questions?
There was a book written about the Midland Discovery, wasn't there?
The Midland Discovery, that is the book that's in the case?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is the original report of the Midland Discovery that came out. The skull and the bones are no longer here in Midland. They're in a natural history museum, I believe, in Chicago. Go ahead.
When was that book published?
The discovery was made in '53, and I believe the book was published in '56.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Another thing I do want to touch upon, which we mentioned briefly, is the sound. How did you come? The sound is obviously a big part of creating the atmosphere and the immersion. Tell us a little bit about how you developed the sound design here and what you're hoping to achieve with that.
Yeah. The sound design, I don't know if anyone was able to really experience the sound. Usually during an opening reception, there are too many bodies and there's too much other sound, but so you're gonna have to come back. But the sound was, it's the abstracted sound from a pump jack that I had slowed down to really get to the essence of this movement. And then also there's a component of the sound that is abstracted, like cavern cave sounds. So for me, when I'm visualizing the sound, is this undulation of moving from above the ground to below and having the viewer kind of feel that experience through that sonic element. And there's a lot of deep bass in the work that, for me, it kind of breaks the boundary of the body, right? Like when when you feel sound, it affects you differently. So I wanted to kind of push against that boundary where you can look away from something, it still exists as external to you, but to feel a sound, it's like part of you, like you're then part of the work. And that's another thing that's interesting and really, I don't know, what I love about installation is that you then become, I'm like asking you to play with the work, right? Like humor me, like become a part of it, and not pick at it with your hands, but pick at it, like interrogate what you're seeing and really think like, what could this be? I like having work that is inclusive also. And as far as what I want, you might ask this question, but what I want an audience to get out of the work is just like thinking through your own context. Everyone comes to ideas or critical, everyone comes to things from different contexts, right? I'm a New Yorker, I've never been to the Southwest, I'm coming to this from my context. I don't know what your context is, but however you're coming to the context of the work, you're gonna read it differently, and that's wonderful, that's great. The access to the work is super important to me, to where you shouldn't have to know a ton about contemporary art to get what's happening here. And I think the sound and the visual elements, the cues, kind of give these hints to where even if you're not like, oh, I understand this about subterranean interiority, blah, 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 it doesn't matter. It's like whatever you get from it, that's yours. Like the work is done, it's not mine anymore. And now it's for whatever is taken from it.
Are there any more questions? Lauren will of course be here all night.
Yes, please ask.
So-
Not all night.
New Yorker.
For short amount of time. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I mean, you mentioned you're working on doctorate in visual culture. I mean, how does your work here relate to, I guess, previous, work along this line? Are there particular artist works that you find yourself with, against? Does this relate to your dissertation that you're working on?
Well, I think this is going to be, I feel like this is like jump starting a new project for me, where I'm really interested in thinking about American landscape, or this mythos of what the American landscape can hold, and how that relates to religious influence. So I think this is kind of starting something that I don't really have all of that yet, but I really enjoyed this type of work where I'm doing research, I'm coming to a place and doing more like embodied research, which is new for me. Usually it's just like documentaries and reading, but intellectualizing things sometimes doesn't get the whole picture. You need to really be in a space. And how it relates to other works, all of my work essentially has been about one of the three, or the relationship between body, religion, and ecology. And so I kind of go back and forth between these systems and try and just, I'm not trying to answer questions, it's just about like interrogation at that rate, which is really interesting to me. But as far as other artists, artists that I'm like in conversation with, or like I see myself in conversation with artists.
Or against?
Or against. I don't know about against. I mean, Mark Dion, I think, is one of my favorite artists, and I think that I would love for my work to essentially at some point be in conversation, or someone to put it in conversation. Pinar Yoldas, who is a professor at UC Santa Cruz, who uses parafiction and speculative fiction installations to think about climate change and the future of the human body as Earth changes and adapts to new contaminants. What else? Doreen Garner, I think, is a great, I love Doreen Garner. If you don't know who she is, look her up. She thinks a lot about the history of, she uses the aesthetics of science, which we're not really getting too much in this installation, to critique historical figures and the way history is told. And reframes that through installation and performance. And she specifically thinks about race and the female body and how, and she uses more like sculpture and like more grotesque imagery to get an audience to think about these things and to really consider, you know, how bodies are being used or were used historically and what that means now in contemporary lens.
We have a question here as well.
I would like you to expand more on what the oil is. What's your process on deciding what's in the oil?
Well, at first, thinking about Midland and the relationship between religion and economy here, that's palpable to me. So I think that having that type of connection through this symbol was important. I didn't want it to be super heavy-handed, but I wanted to have something that I could make that connection where if you're from a Catholic background or if you understand something about the history of religion, you might make that connection between this anointing oil that is used in, you know, sacred ceremonies to oil of the land and that type of hierarchy that's being that I'm kind of playing with there.
What is it? What kind of oil is it?
It's anointing oil. Telling all my secrets.
What's the connection then between the interior of the earth, the interior of the woman, the interior? And to me, I read the anointing oil as connecting it all with love.
Okay.
A love of the unknown, the spiritual, the God,
Mm-hmm.
however you want to connect it, but we'll all have interiors. We're all connected through love.
Keep going, that's great. Tell us more.
I just, that's what I read because, you know, immediately we looks like Carlsbad, the stalactites is like the interior of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And then my dear friend here says, but I think I see a baby. So we're trying to figure out, maybe there's a woman there. Like we were trying to, I'm sorry, I'm a novice at this.
No.
So I was trying to figure this out. So I was like, yeah, that's the interior of the earth, the interior of the woman.
Yeah.
And then we immediately thought, because we have Catholic background as well, holy water, holy oil. We were having this big discussion. And then it just felt like, love. That's how you connect. That's what we all want, the earth and the humanity. We want to all connect with love.
That's
Well,
better
the
than the thing
anointing
I said.
oil will be love.
It would be love
Any
from God. Yes, love of God. and
thing they
spirituality.
did with the oil would be
Of love. I felt the love of the beyond, like you said, the body to the transcending spirituality of it. You know? It's an anointing of love.
I see the four elements the way everyone
Interesting.
And there's also this implication of physical touch too with the oil, right?
Yes.
Because although
Yes.
it is in the vessel now, it is in the vessel to be taken out of the vessel and then used between two bodies to come together and have this kind of, you know, biblically when Jesus' feet was washed with the hair. There was no greater symbol to him of love than that. So like, there's this kinetic potential for people to come together there too. I think that's a great suggestion of movement and what might happen in this space without the movement actually being there or depicting it.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions at this time? So our Artist in Residence program, I'm really excited for this to be happening. Of course, the vast majority, all of our exhibitions here usually feature artists from Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, our region. But the Artist in Residence program, bringing in artists from outside of our region to do these kind of research-based projects, site-specific projects for us here at the Museum of the Southwest, I think is really exciting, and I could not be more honored than to have Lauren Ruiz be our first Artist in Residence. So let's give her a round of applause. We will be here literally all night.
All night.
So take your time and talk. Thank you guys.